Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Tim Kosnoff. I've been doing representation of survivors of child sexual abuse since 1995. I've represented thousands against a variety of institutions. So a podcast series I was very proud to be a part of. I was co-host of Architecture of Abuse. I want to thank everybody who's taken the time to listen to the Architecture of Abuse series. We've had thousands of individuals, tens of thousands of downloads. It has reached a wide audience and continues to expand. And it's a pretty remarkable, I would call it a documentary, but it's also been very helpful to many, many victims of child sexual abuse. I know that because me and my team have been receiving emails and phone calls steadily since that first episode aired back in June. And I'd like to share a little bit about what we've learned in terms of the reaction to the Architecture of Abuse. The calls we get have been heartening because folks have connected with it, many of whom were abused some time ago, thought they would never come forward, but the program gave them the language and the tools and the courage to come forward and make that very difficult first step, which is to simply send me an email or to call and leave a message and start a conversation. So that's been gratifying. It was the whole reason we decided to do this is we needed a place where people could go and learn, one, that they aren't alone, two, that it wasn't their fault, and three, that they could have most, if not all of their questions, which sort of centers around, why did this happen to me? And the Architecture of Abuse explored that question with experts from a variety of fields. And I've been doing this for such a long time, but I learned so much from other people talking about their clients as clinicians, social workers, historians, experts in religious domination. It really brought together, I think, in one place, a cohesive explanation of why it happened and why it continues to happen and why it will continue to happen. I had the privilege of being invited to speak about Architecture of Abuse, the making of it, my background and career, to the Sunstone Conference in Salt Lake City about a month ago. And it was a very heartening experience. It was very well attended. We actually had 2 sessions, and many of the people who attended the first session came back early the next morning for the second session. And the questions were wonderful. And these are folks that came from just a broad spectrum of the LDS community. Some were still in the church and devout members. Others had left the church. And it's a pretty eclectic group of individuals. And it was really interesting for me to interact with them over the weekend. One of the interesting things was we had so many people that came to this event who hadn't even heard of Architecture of Abuse, but they were so interested in the subject matter that they wanted to come and hear more. It was gratifying to know that we were, through the Architecture of Abuse series, we were speaking not just to survivors and educating them, but we were also reaching a broader LDS community. And I should mention that there were many people that I met there who were not even LDS. They were non-LDS, but they lived in the area and they knew it was going to be interesting, so they came and to participate in the various lectures and workshops. And I found that really interesting. This is a very interesting, educated, inquisitive, sensitive group of people. And I was just so sorry that I hadn't come to earlier Sunstone conferences. So to those folks, thank you for coming and listening and recognizing that this is a huge issue in the community. And I did receive a lot of comments along the line, which is they didn't know. We didn't understand how big this thing was in our community. You know, we'd read an article here or there, and then the church would deny that it was a broader problem. And we've just never heard the other side of the story. And it was shocking, enlightening, informative, and gave them a perspective that many of them just didn't have before they came to these sessions. So it told me that we have a lot more work to do here. We need to broaden this thing out. So we are listening to what people are telling us they want to hear more about, basing off their questions. So the questions that we get are foremost about something that we mentioned, which was that we've been keeping a list, a database, if you will, of abusers in the LDS Church. And while there have been some other organizations that have documented court cases and other cases in the public record of offenders in the LDS Church, we have been gathering names, but we have not been making them public. Part of the reason is, well, for one thing, it's proprietary. We can't put those names out there in the public domain legally unless we are doing it in the context of filing a lawsuit, in which case lawyers are shielded from libel or slander if they are making allegations in the context of a lawsuit. Most of the cases that we handle are resolved without the necessity for a lawsuit. So those names are not in the public domain. But we've decided that if you call us and you want to know whether your abuser is in our database, we will tell you whether they are or not. And through those calls, the callers, if nothing else, are doing something extremely important, which is they are identifying yet another abuser in the LDS Church, heretofore unknown, probably like most, never arrested, never turned over to the police. There's no record because the church, as we know, deals with them internally. Now, we do know the church has its own internal church court system, and it's got files and records of abusers, but this is information they keep very tightly held. So they call us, they're curious about our database. They also sometimes just want to talk. And we understand that. It's healing just to have somebody that understands the phenomenon and what you're going through. And, we can provide some words of support, maybe some guidance to encourage them to seek professional counseling if that's something they have an interest in. And if it sounds as if there's something that we may be able to do for them because of the circumstances of their case, such as where the abuse occurred, which unfortunately seems like an irrelevant question, but because of the statutes of limitations, one thing can happen in the state of Utah, and it's very difficult to impossible for us to really do anything because of the harshly restricted statutes of limitations. But, it could be across the border in Nevada or California or Oregon or Washington, same set of facts. And because those are more victim-friendly jurisdictions, as opposed to Utah and Idaho and some other states where the Mormon Church is so dominant politically and otherwise, have become places that are, child abuser friendly. We've also, in the process of keeping this database, we could call it what they call in the Catholic Church, a credibly accused list. In the Catholic Church, for a variety of reasons, when so many of these cases against their clergy, their priest clergy, came forward, the demands from their own parishioners to do something required that they publicly identify abusers that they labeled credibly accused. Now, I don't know exactly the investigation that church's lawyers did, but there must have been a substantial amount of credible evidence that those lawyers reviewed before they recommended to the archbishop or cardinal of the diocese or archdiocese, yes, that this person is credibly accused, and this is somebody whose name you should put on the list and put out there in the public domain so that people know that Father so-and-so was, involved in the abuse of children. And each archdiocese maintains one of those. It's now probably in the thousands. The Catholic Church is different than in the Mormon Church in the sense that it has a professional clergy, and most, if not all, of the abusers in the Catholic Church were priests, agents, employees of the church. They were hired, put in positions of authority over families with children, had access to children, unquestioned, unfettered access to children in schools and in parishes and in youth organizations within the church. So legally, they were accountable not just because in many instances, most instances, they knew or should have known that this priest was abusing children, but also because they were in an employer-employee relationship with the priest. They couldn't claim that somehow, because they're a religious organization, they couldn't or shouldn't share this information. In that sense, they were no different than a school district or any other secular institution that has employees. So we don't see a credibly accused list in the Mormon Church. It has information about many, many individuals. It will oftentimes hide behind the differences between the structure of the LDS Church and the Catholic Church, in that, with the exception of general authorities and so forth, it doesn't have a paid clergy. Bishops and stake presidents are volunteers. But nevertheless, under the law, the Mormon Church is just as responsible in the absence of an employer-employee relationship if they knew or should have known, and because they deliberately use an all-volunteer system within the church. They call these individuals, they put them into positions of responsibility, whether it be in young men's or in Relief Society or in their Sunday school classrooms, home teachers, missionaries, and so forth. These individuals legally are as much agents of the church as priests are agents of the Catholic Church. But the difference is the Catholic Church is recognizing that it does have both a legal and a moral responsibility to warn families of the risks posed by priests. And even though some of these priests may have been removed from parishes and are no longer serving in that capacity, once you become a member of the clergy in the Catholic Church, it's forever, it's lifetime. And the church, under its internal system, is required to keep these men, and so they will keep them in a relatively secure facility and will not deliberately put them out in the community. But the LDS Church does none of that. It maintains no list. It warns no one. Hence the curiosity that people have to pick up the phone or to contact us wanting to know if their abuser is in our list. I mentioned that there are some other websites where there are not just the names of LDS individuals who've been arrested, prosecuted, sued civilly for the molestation of children, and they put that information out there freely on the internet. That is both good and bad. The good is it does provide information to people who are earnestly looking for legitimate information. Unfortunately, it's also given rise to something that is very destructive and unfortunate. And that is something that I've rarely seen in my career, but now it's a thing, and it's a big thing, and it's fraud. So there's been a lot of interest since Architecture of Abuse in our proprietary database of abusers. And we've been asked what is coming, and we are working on that. There's been a lot of interest in wanting to know whether their abuser is on our list, and if so, specifics about that particular abuser. Were there other victims before me? Were there other victims after me? Were they groomed and abused the same way I was? Now, some of this information we can share, some of it we can't, because it's privileged, because it was shared with us by other individuals who expected us to keep it private. But we are planning to profile individuals who were known abusers, and we may not share all of the information about these individuals because we are concerned about illegitimate claims coming forward based upon information that we put out there in the public domain. So we need to be careful. But the value of this, hopefully for everybody, whether the individuals that we profile happen to be the person that abused you or not, we think it will be very helpful, because the important thing is not who the abuser is. What is most helpful is an understanding of the nature of these individuals, how they operate, what is the pattern. And I think you'll be struck by the similarities among all of these perpetrators in relation to how they were able to gain access to children in the LDS Church and abuse them and others over generations, dozens and dozens of children, even after the church became aware and maybe took church court action against them, disciplinary action, possibly excommunicated them only to rebaptize them back into the church, never disclosing to membership this individual background and history. But there also seems to be an interest in understanding the nature of this behavior. These individuals, how do they get this way? Why do they do this? How are they able to access children, get them into situations and places where they could abuse them, keep them quiet, intimidate them, or manipulate them emotionally, not to disclose, because that is the child abuser's worst nightmare, which is that there's a disclosure and that individual gets turned over to the police. So we hope to talk about that, but also dive into the particular nature of LDS abusers. And they are different. There is a difference. So thank you. We have more episodes coming. We hope you'll tune in and look forward to talking with you more next season. Thank you.